Joining us now is Andrew McCarthy. Andrew is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy and contributing editor at National Review. During his distinguished career, he served as chief assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. He led the 1995 terrorism prosecution with regard to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Andrew, thank you for being with us again.
Senator, always a pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Jerry is just telling me that you just posted something very interesting in response to the president's bemoaning these terrible crimes that were committed on September 11, 2001. Tell us your feeling about what he said.
I just think it's such a terrible signal to send on any day, but particularly on this day. You know, look, what happened to us on September 11th, like what happened to us with the USS Cole and our embassies in East Africa and the Kobar Towers, was an act of war. And I'm convinced, having spent more years than I care to say, both dealing with terrorists, debriefing them, studying them, prosecuting them, that what causes terrorism and what causes these atrocities to happen is not Abu Ghraib or Gitmo or any of the intolerance, poverty, Israel, or whatever other excuse we're using this week. It's successful terrorist attacks and the perception among radicals that America is weak and that there won't be recompense for these kinds of atrocities. That's what causes it. And when you say that these are acts of war, what you're basically saying is we should treat them like we treated them. I'm sorry, when you say that they're crimes, what you're saying is that we should treat them like we treated them throughout the 1990s. Yep. And having been on the front lines at the time, I think that's the reason these things continued to happen.
In other words, you wait, you treat it like an ordinary crime. You wait for the crime to happen. You have very prescribed rules as to what you can do to hassle anybody before a crime is committed. You hear over and over again, well, I can't do anything. He hasn't committed any crime. Then the crime happens, and you catch them and bring them to trial, and in many cases spend a few $1 million on an individual to try them in a court of law. That would have been a foreign concept to Franklin D. Roosevelt, for example.
It sure would have. In fact, I remember the German saboteurs were captured, tried, had their appeal, and were executed in the space of about 6 weeks in 1942. And that came to mind a few months ago when the appeal in the embassy bombing case was decided, only 11 years after the attacks of 1998.
I'm looking here at a story that ran on September 19 of 2001. And the Hyde Park Herald, containing then State Senator Barack Obama's response to the 9/11 tragedy. And he talks about the difficult task of understanding the sources of such madness. And he finishes up, most often it has to do and grows out of a climate of poverty and ignorance, hopelessness, and despair. That's his read on the causes and the sources of the attack on September 11. I mean, a person that doesn't understand world history or modern history, as far as that's concerned, any more than that would, I guess, be expected to look at it as just another criminal operation where underprivileged kids, get caught up, hanging out with the wrong people.
Right. I think there's a great temptation, and a lot of people on the left, Obama among them, fall into it, to think that we can control what causes this. And the idea is that if it's caused by poverty or it's caused by American policy on this or that, we can dial it down by simply changing our policy or changing conditions on the ground. And what I think is difficult for people to come to terms with is this is an ideology. It's not something America can do anything about. What motivates all of this is the belief that they are under a divine injunction to wage jihad, whether violently or by other means, in order to impose Sharia law and turn the world into a Muslim world.
And these are not just kids out here telling us this. This has to do with the leadership, for example, of the country of Iran. I mean, they believe this, and they're not bashful to tell you that is the source of it. We just choose not to believe them because we can't understand it. I want to move on to something else, Andrew, that I think is going to be the source of a lot of discussion, and that is your piece you did on the National Review Online, I believe, yesterday. Would Obama really fight the war? And you talk about the Foreign Policy Initiative letter to the president from Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, and others, friends of ours, who are urging the president to fight this war in Afghanistan. But you take a different read on it. You take a skeptical read on it. You're not doing, as I see it, what George Will, the conservative columnist, is saying, is that we ought to get out. But you're saying that it doesn't look to you like that their definition of war has any chance of becoming the president's definition of war, and therefore you seem to be concerned that it's fruitless. Is that?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, what my feeling about this is, I try to think about my own 23-year-old son and how I'd feel about him being dispatched to this exercise that we're engaged in now. And I think any of us who loves our country and have put ourselves on the line for it understands the need to wage war when war has to be waged to defeat our enemies. But what I don't understand is what we're engaged in Afghanistan. And even though I agree with Bill Kristol and Fred Kagan and others about the need to defeat our enemies, and if I believed that was what we were doing, I'd be probably the most gung-ho guy in the room supporting it. I think we've been led astray a lot in the last 8 years by more of a desire to do a social engineering exercise in democratizing the Islamic world, and less on an enterprise to defeat our enemies. And even if you wanted to democratize the Muslim world, I don't particularly believe that that's going to take. But if I was wrong about that, I'd still think that we needed to defeat the enemy first before that even had a prayer. And I just don't see us doing it. And I don't see this president ever doing it.
Do you think that McChrystal has bought into this hearts and minds first thing?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that that's true. I mean, I also think he's a good man and he's a fine...
That's what I can't understand. Where does the hearts and minds stuff begin or end, and when is the fighting? What role does that play? We're going to talk about nation building, but I'm surprised that a guy like McChrystal has bought into that, because that's what everybody's saying now. This can't. All these military people are saying this war can't be won on the battlefield. What do you make of it?
It can't be won on the battlefield, but a lot of it can. And it may be that if you decide to fight a global war as if it were merely an insurgency in one place, that you have to do the hearts and minds business in order to at least convince the convincibles in the place where you're trying to fight to trust you and allow you to get to where the bad guys are so you can get the intelligence and all that stuff. I get that. I think the problem is that to win a war, you have to defeat both their capability and their will. And since we're not going about the business of defeating the will of the enemy, we have to take out all their capabilities. And if you leave Iran in place and you don't disturb them...
Yeah. The source. Now we're finding Iranian weapons in Afghanistan. Big surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, they're stabbing us, in the back while we're busily
There's stubbornness in the front. I mean,
and
there's
hearts,
just no back about it.
Well, we're concentrating, as Andrew says, on Afghanistan. They're doing all these things that we're not paying attention to. In fact, encouraging them by shows of weaknesses left and right. That's your concern. You don't think this president will wage a war?
Right, and I don't think it's morally acceptable to throw in more of our young people in the hope that he'll do it. I would want to see some commitment to victory before I thought the sacrifice was worth it. But if we're sending kids over there, to help the Afghan economy, or whatever it said in the New York Times last week, that's not my idea of why we have a military and why we would put these kids' lives on the line.
Well, boy, I tell you, there are going to be a lot of people who think the way you do about it, and it probably is going to be the source of our lack of success. If in fact that's what happens, it's going to be the basis of a lot of conversation we need to have. Andrew, thank you for that, and thank you for being with us.